The Daily Adoptee News Now is a space where transracial adoptee voices can shine as the experts in topics that impact adoption and adoption reform. Tonight on the show, I have my friend, Boni Croyle, a DEI consultant and the founder of the Ebenezer Project. We will be talking about the 2020 election and about how politics impacts her work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. Talking politics. I love talking about the strategy and why things work. So my first question for you is, what is your gauge for this year's election before it happened?
So that's a great question. And Brittany, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I am so excited to be on your inaugural show. So this is just delightful. And I love that we're talking politics. So I'm a Pennsylvania girl, born and raised, born in Philly. And so when we were even just in the throes of this election, I want to take us back like 2 years ago. To be honest, I was already predicting that it was going to be a landslide for Trump. I know rural farm land. I know rural farm people, and I know Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is a big swing state. So I was for sure that everything was going to go the same way as 2016, and that there would even be a bigger gap. Just because I was looking at how many people were excited about Elizabeth Warren, how many people were excited about Bernie Sanders. I didn't think that Joe Biden, once we hit 2020, would have enough people behind him to really get everyone on board, because I love being a Democrat, but let's face it, Democrats don't always show up to the polls. So alongside came 2020, and we're really hit on all sides. We have the pandemic. We know that many Democrats live in areas that really experience voter suppression. And we know that Black and Brown communities are even more disproportionately impacted by the pandemic because we're essential workers. So not only are we not getting that time off to go vote, but here we are already showing up during a pandemic, and we're not excited about the candidate that we are now electing. So I was predicting absolute landslide for Trump. And here's why. Our country has a long, storied, dangerous, and frankly irreprehensible history of really backing politics of hate. And I was seeing that in the rhetoric in which Trump was emboldening. And I know a lot of people have given Trump the credit of saying like, oh, he's the only racist. And a lot of Black and Brown communities have been like, no, he is just a manifestation of what we've known all along, that white supremacy has never gone away. And we've been saying that for not just 200 years, but frankly, since 1492 and the colonialization of indigenous lands. And I think when I was seeing the way in which white supremacists and white nationalist ranks were growing, and the way in which Trump's blatant racist rhetoric and misogynist rhetoric was really impacting their ranks, things like Charlottesville, things like all the killings that we don't even know about. I was really anticipating that Trump was going to win. And I was really anticipating that Pennsylvania was going to stay a swing state. So what's interesting to me when you look at Pennsylvania actually flipping, it's Philadelphia. Philadelphia came through, and you look at the rest of the state and it's all red. And that's actually really terrifying to me, as far as like how many people consider that this blatant white nationalist rhetoric is not enough of a deal breaker to vote for someone else, regardless if you're Republican, regardless if you're saying, okay, I can't back Trump, vote for the third party. And granted, I think that voting for a third party is always a waste, vote for a Democrat. But if you are really saying that you're going to vote with your morals and you don't find that racist rhetoric is a deal breaker, you're a racist. And I think, that leads us into your second question. But
okay, I have a second question. I have a second question, but now I have a question based on what you said.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, swing state, that it really came down to that urban area that flipped, the outcome of this election, or helped to. But let's go back. And you said, I didn't think that, we would have enough push to overturn this. Can we talk a little bit about the Black and Brown communities that actually made this happen? And we'll go into the next question, but I think that's a really important, because you're saying like this urban center, it turned blue, but in the states that I've lived in Minnesota, even in Colorado, the state for the presidential election turned blue, but for the rest of the politics and the positions that we were voting for, and even the, initiatives on the town level, they still turned red. And that's really concerning. But when we see the turnout that we did to flip the presidential election, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think so. A lot of people have been talking about Stacey Abrams, right, in Georgia, and I am forgetting the other 4 women they've identified that have really been the push in Georgia. But I think specifically 2 things when I think about Philly. I think, like you said, it's concerning that we can get through for a presidential election and not really care so much about state legislators and what's happening at the local level. And I think a variety of reasons for that. One, I think a lot of people have lost hope about local city officials. I'm not sure. So there's been a lot of viral videos recently of Black women really going into police officer meetings that they have and just speaking their truth. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that's needed. And I think that's really important. But I think why we might not be seeing some change at the city and local level is when we think about defunding. There was this really beautiful post that someone said, and they said, I don't want a more diverse, drone operator. I don't want drone operators. And I think we kind of get lost in the weeds when we think about what does it mean to defund? And if we're saying defund, we don't even want those systems. And I think people might choose not to vote for a number of reasons, or maybe get confused about how deep these positions at the local level can really impact what's happening at the city level and on our communities. I also think that a lot of Black communities, specifically men, are a little bit more conservative. So we could talk a little bit about the divide of, we want a blue president, and yet some people might also want more conservative politics at the local level. And so I think there's a variety, it's hard for me to speculate because I think there's so many reasons why it doesn't show up at the local level. But I think it's an important one to discuss. And I think I get a little nervous talking about it in front of the white gaze, just because I think there's so much to really take a deep dive into saying we need to discuss this and we need to talk about solutions forward. And I'm not always sure what those solutions are, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I think a lot of it lies within education. I think that when it comes to the outcomes that we saw when it came to voting, and again, making a statement about whose character, not necessarily who, but the type of character we want to see within, our presidential offices, we definitely took a stand. Right. But I also know it took a lot of education to get people there. Education about the importance of voting, education about the actual issues. That's something this time, when it comes to presidential platforms and what they're running on, we've typically haven't had to vote on character. We've just been voting on policy. And policy, we may not truly understand the impact of it, even though the intent might have been structured in a way that, this could possibly work. This time we really voted on character. And when I think of the work that I've done, when it came to educating people to vote, and just giving them access to information about what we're voting on. Something that I learned and used during this year was I moved from Minnesota to Alabama to Colorado. So I didn't have a base of knowing who my constituents were, not constituents, or my political leaders are. I was a constituent that was uneducated just by the fact of a move. So one of my goals coming into the election on the presidential level, I paid attention, but I knew how I was going to vote because I already knew what type of character. But when it came down to the state level and the city level, I had to go and search for what I was looking for. When I moved here in Colorado, I sat down with somebody who had been working within, the nonprofits and within government and sitting on different boards throughout the city and saying, what's going on here? And he gave me some great information of things to look at, of how to start navigating my city when it came to being educated and knowing about what was going on. I also started working for a group in Minnesota doing just we formed basically because white people, again, weren't being nice and were denying that racism was a thing. And so it's specifically a group of women that were women of culture. We are really set on changing our immediate communities. And to do that, we see the value in grassroots efforts. And I'm all on board on that because guess who got everyone to vote? The grassroots efforts. If we're looking from the Indian reservations to the middle of the urban city, even out in, places that are predominantly white, if you were a person of culture, my organizations, the people that represented me, they were trying to make sure that I was finding information. So I go back to that education plus grassroots movements. Listen, they're on fire right now. They're doing stuff for us that, we've been asking for. So I see there is where we're doing this developing, we're doing an education, and we should be paying more attention to them and pushing more money towards them also. Because I also know, working in the social justice field and working alongside politics within small cities, what happens to funding? It doesn't get filtered down to our grassroots movements. It gets stuck in a nonprofit that has a national, following. And it's sad because then you really see politics being played out at the expense of people. When you have people who are creating these movements from what they see is missing in their communities, and you ignore them, they're going to fight back. And I think we really proved that with the presidential race. And so now it's about how can we implement that for our local races?
Yes. Yeah. And, Brittany, I like that you said education plus grassroots movements, but I also think it's really important to consider anytime that we have heightened racial consciousness, I think there's catalysts, not just in Black and Brown communities, but there's catalysts for people to want to be an informed voter. And so I think just the amount of time it takes to become an informed voter, right? There's lots of websites that'll tell you take this quiz and we'll tell you who you should vote for, right? It takes a lot of time. And frankly, I feel like once we get into the nitty gritty, we could talk about access to all of that information. We can talk about lack of access and the ways in which people are routinely disenfranchised from information. But I think especially when we have heightened racial consciousness over racist events, we really get a spike in attention and spike in people that are saying, okay, I want to do all of this research, which kind of leads me into some of the additional questions that you have later, just as about how we need to stay vigilant, because I think absolutely right. We need money in those grassroots movements. I think we also need to be aware of white complacency and how that really disrupts and frankly harms. I think it can be really disingenuous where you have the white allies that are doing all of this work and posting their Black squares, and then it's already November and they're taking their deep breaths and drinking their pumpkin spice, whatever, because now Joe Biden, President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris are now in the White House supposedly in January 20. And I think when we're talking about education, when we're talking about we need this to go on and we need money, we lose people that have historically been in places of power and privilege who hoard that wealth, we lose their pockets when they get complacent. And that's something that I'm very cognizant of as we move forward.
Very much so. Within the group that I'm working with, that we made a very specific stand to let the white allies within the group really know what we needed them for. And I remember having a conversation on Facebook where I said, listen, I know who I need, where to do what access. I know those things. It's when I get to the point and I'm saying, I need your access for this, where feelings start getting hurt. I remember one white guy was like, what, you just need me for my money and my position? Yeah, I actually do. I absolutely do. Like, there's no, you can't get me to backpedal on that at all, because our government is 89% white still, or something like that. Right. So you literally hold the positions like we need to put people in. So asking and being very intentional for what you need allies for, yes, please do it. And the ones that get mad, and the ones
they're not
get mad, they're not yours. And let them walk away, because they will do more damage to the movement, to what you're trying to do, versus, hey, you have all these people saying they support you, but there is no return on your investment of allowing them access to spaces that you create, whether it's in racial justice, whether it's at your work, whether I think it's unacceptable that we can't ask to say, hey, this is what I need you for, because for how long have we been, the same thing has been done for us? Yeah. Because that's what happened this election.
Yes, absolutely.
The whole country said, Black and brown people, you have to show up for us. Black women especially, you have to show up for us. So that's kind of the messaging that people got comfortable with. Yeah. But when we turn the tables and say, hey, I need this, that's when, I'll say it, feelings start getting hurt. Yeah. And they shouldn't be.
Well, and I think a few things, right? So Ice Cube's little platinum plan, which somebody wrote on Facebook, I wish Ice Cube would melt, and not just whatever. But I think it's important to think about, when we are asking our allies for specific actions, let's demand that they show up. And so when Joe Biden said on his electoral speech that he would have Black and brown people's backs, I think what would have been like, okay, this is a wild idea, Brittany, but what would have been like if we said, we will not get our communities to vote for you unless you can deliver on these things? Because after he gave that, I saw that many Black Lives Matter founders were saying, we want a meeting. Demand that prior to delivering the Black vote. And I think about that, hindsight's not 2020. 2020, I don't want to say, because, but hindsight is good. But I think about that as far as, what would it be like now to say our votes are worth something? When we show up, it is worth something. And so before we even deliver, and actually have that said by people that can deliver, right? So not people like Ice Cube. But if we would say, we know the value of what we can bring to the table, and we're not even interested until we have it in writing, until we see the receipts of what you will do for us before we deliver for you. And I think about when you said that white guy that was saying, well, you only want me for this. It's interesting, especially working in corporate spaces, how easy white access happens in networking, right? So everyone knows, if you're on LinkedIn, like, I'm going to tap you for a job or referral. And white people are very comfortable letting other white people use them in that way. But as soon as Black people get specific about, I want the same access, I find that very interesting.
It is definitely very interesting. And I've seen it happen where people don't push back. And that's why when he said that, I was like, finally, somebody said it and I can give the pushback. Because it's that important of a message. Like when you say, I mean, I already hold him to a contract, whether it's in writing, it's going to sway my vote how you treat Black and brown people going forward. it really, that's how much it matters. And I'm willing to do one term, whatever it is to get this right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm willing to do at this point. And I want everybody else to get really comfortable with that message.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the message that pushes us forward on the momentum that we have. This is strategy, and we need to, the emotions of racism are 100% valid.
Yes.
But I am such a proponent of strategy and using things to my advantage. And Black and brown people can find an opportunity anywhere.
Yes. Yes.
Most definitely. Okay, so moving on to our next question.
Okay.
What about now that we have nearly all the votes counted, we have some states that are still out, but President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, they've been, coined the winner of this election.
Yes.
What do you think?
So I have a few thoughts, and primarily my first little theme is just proceed with caution. I'm cautiously optimistic, and I want to tell you why. I think it's careful how we frame this election. I think a lot of people are quick to put their cute little hashtags like love wins and unity moving forward on this election. And I think we have to be really, really careful about it. As amazing as it was to see people and leaders from around the world celebrating election of now President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, I think we need to be honest about what the last 4 years meant, specifically in terms of racism, specifically in terms of violence, specifically in terms of trauma that so many of us are carrying, and to honor the fact that so many people did not survive these past 4 years. And so many people will not survive the next few months with the pandemic, with the violence that we're not talking about, with the forced hysterectomies that are happening here in Tucson, Arizona, with the kids that are still in cages, with the sexual abuse of the migrant children by border police. Like, we are not surviving, and many of us will carry this trauma moving forward. So I think it's really important to be clear about, yes, we have votes. Yes, Trump is already trying to create different legislation and create different lawsuits in multiple states saying that this is not a real election. And I think we have to be really careful about, even if he doesn't concede well, even if something happens, like, things have already happened. And I think we have to be honest about that. I also think that we have to think specifically about what does it mean when Biden and Kamala become president, because I truly believe that they will. I'm not saying that there won't be a stink. I'm not saying that Trump won't do something ridiculous for the next 2 months. I'm not saying that he might just live on the golf course. We don't know. But I think that regardless of the win, there was a lot of losing that happened. And I want to be clear about what that looks like. We might have a new president. We might have a new VP that looks like us, but we still have systemic racism. We are still denied access in corporate spaces. We are denied access at the front lines. We are denied access in our housing. We are denied access across the board. And I think that regardless that we see this new hope and this new unity that people are trying to spread out there, which I think is dangerous. I think that we have to be really vigilant about keeping these two new people accountable to the promises that they have made. I think we have to stay even more vigilant, frankly, because I think with white complacency, it's going to be harder to say these are things that are happening that are wrong. Because the media, when I think about Obama and Michelle, the way in which the media really skewed how they talked about things that were happening, I think we're going to see that again. And I think our community organizers really need to gear up for what does it mean to do this work again when white people aren't listening.
Yeah. Having white people listen is a key part. Your message of this isn't over, we have to be vigilant. I feel it's a very necessary message, because we already know what the fatigue is.
Yeah.
We've been doing this, but we keep thinking about our families and our people that they're missing, they're dying, for various reasons that are solvable problems. And I really think looking at the pandemic and this happening during a pandemic is such a solvable problem. It's such a solvable problem. And I know my frustration always comes when, listen, if we have solvable problems, why aren't we solving them? And so that vigilance is, you can't stop listening now. This was a win that came on levels, but it still has a level of consequence if we don't have that vigilance. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So our next question though. The first Black Asian American woman was elected for one of the highest government positions. How does this impact the lives of women of culture going forward?
Yeah, so I love this question. And you'll notice a theme throughout my answers tonight is, I will say, cautiously optimistic. So I am that person. I will celebrate every single person who is breaking the glass ceilings. I will celebrate Kamala as she's saying, like, lead with dream with ambition, lead with conviction, and talking to specifically the children and saying, you can do this and we will support you. There's a saying one of my good friends told me, and she said, you know, Boni, every Black experience is a valid experience unless it is invalidating Black people and it's harmful. And I think the same is true when we think about breaking glass ceilings. Every glass ceiling that's broken is absolutely valid and worth celebrating unless the person who breaks it is actively trying to rebuild that glass ceiling. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think whenever we see someone who looks like us in power, we start to see how systems in which we are familiar and personal with start to treat Black and brown women again. Not only from the media are we going to see racist and sexist and misogynistic language, which will, bring up our own trauma. But I often notice that people will have louder conversations. And I don't know if this is just the communities that I'm in, but maybe you get this too, Brittany, but you'll hear white people just talking about Black and brown women, especially when they have Kamala Harris, or they're trying to struggle to say her name right. And we're already seeing that. And it really does something, I think, to our personal souls, in the sense of not only am I experiencing more trauma at work as people are speculating about politics and using it all under this framework that it's just politics, when I'm this is active, racist, violent language that you're using. But also when you're just out and about, and people think oh, you look like Kamala, and they feel they can just bring up politics to you. So I think whenever we see Black and brown women in the spotlight, Black and brown women, wherever you are, regardless of your SES, are really going to feel more of that violence and that language impacting their personal lives. That is not to say that we shouldn't run. We should run for all the things. But I think all of us are more cognizant of how it impacts us. For example, when she was doing her VP speech debate with Pence, and she said the line, "I'm speaking," and you're seeing women from all around the world say, I know what this is like because I've experienced sexism at the workplace. When you get into the nitty gritty and you think about, okay, when Kamala did her intro and she had to say the name of the hospital in which she was born, because she was already anticipating media to say birtherism theories regarding her. Black women and brown women know what that's like. We see those dog whistles and we anticipate that. And that's a trauma that we relive and we re-experience every time we see her go onto the stage. I think we anticipate what racist and sexist things are they going to say? What misogynistic things are these celebrities going to say? How are the media going to say this in the headlines? When Michelle Obama was FLOTUS, we saw comics where she was depicted as a monkey. We saw comics where it was all oh, it's just politics. It's just political humor. No, we feel that on a visceral level. And I'm anticipating, yes, I'm so excited that this is a woman who is Black and Southeast Asian, and she deserves all the things. But I'm also anticipating my own personal life, the ramp of trauma and the violence and the language that I will actually also experience.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because within our group, when the debates were going on, we polled the women to ask if they were voting. And many Black women said, no, I'm not watching. And it wasn't because it was, they didn't support her. It's how traumatic that is to be within those spaces. I know I have, why I work for myself and why I create spaces for Black women and for brown women is because there's such a violence in working for whiteness for Black women. Because this might be bold to say, everybody will believe that a Black man faced racism. But when it comes to us, like there's largely silence because we don't survive those workplaces.
Yes.
And time again, we don't survive those workplaces. And that's why I think it goes with the trends where you see more Black and brown women starting businesses on their own. We're making specific choices about our mental health and our work-life balance as racism plays a huge role in it. And that, like you said, so cautiously optimistic, because yet again, we have a woman of culture in a position of power who's going to be asked to do a lot of work. We know what comes with that. We know that there will be lots of funding. We know that we'll have to do more with less. We won't be able to hire the staff that we find are the most qualified for positions because of playing politics. And so that's why I'm cautiously optimistic. Because I know she's a woman that can hold her own within the type of position. She didn't get to here just by nothing.
Right.
She is well educated. She has so much of experience, and mostly I'm just like, please let her do her work. I always believe you hire the best candidate. And when you hire the best candidate, you are signing a pact that you are going to let them do what you hired them to do. And for Black women, we find that when that happens, we're the best candidate, and then everything is stripped away. So they have a diversity number.
Yes.
And there's a strong violence in that. Even for myself, I was locked into a room when I gave pushback at, it was a meeting of leaders. And I gave my educated, experienced position for work, and I was locked in a room afterwards. And I was called disruptive, and I was called, aggressive. That's divisive. Our reality. Divisive. We understand that's the reality that our vice president-elect will be working in. We have no qualms about it. And I think that's what fuels our caution. Is there is a real violence that mentally and emotionally she's going to be stripped of without care, and we're really cognizant of that because we've experienced it. So.
And I think one more thing to add, just a note of caution, because again, cautiously optimistic. I think it's really important to hone in on how the media is really selling Kamala as a case of exceptionalism. I think that's really, really important for us to hone in on, because as she has arisen as the vice president-elect, we're hearing, right, all of her credentials. We're hearing the way in which she has been a public servant for X amount of years, and et cetera. And hearing this lovely little American phrase of like, well, if you work hard enough and you dream big enough and you pull yourself up from your bootstraps, anything is possible. And I want to be clear about that specific little notion, because I think it is dangerous. And I think it is really, really important that we get rid of that from our speech moving forward, specifically because so many people do not have access to the systems in which Kamala did. Now, I'm not saying that specifically she had a lot of privilege growing up, But I want to say that as she was moving through the world, privilege definitely did lend her favors that a lot of us don't have. And I think it's really important that when we hear these narratives of like, dream it big enough, anyone can do it, we'll be here and support and cheer you on. A lot of us don't even have enough of that to risk. Like we can't. When we talk about like the pandemic and how many of us are essential workers, a lot of us are just trying to survive. And I think especially when you talk about she will be stripped away without care, the violence, a lot of us are already experiencing that. And to see that happening to someone who is being sold and fed that exceptionalistic dream, I think that's really not just damaging. I think it's really dangerous. And I think it's really violent for Black and Brown communities to see that real time, and knowing like she doesn't necessarily have a support system. And I know when I think about her being there, she's still reporting to a white man. And I think about that a lot as far as what kinds of things she can do, what kinds of ways she can advocate for Black and Brown communities, what ways in which her white adjacency can also afford her and shield her from making, decisions that someone else may not make. So those are all things that I'm also holding space for as I look at her ascension.
Mm-hmm. What impact do you think it has on our government going forward?
So I think it's hard a little bit to speculate. I have some thoughts. Whenever we see women, especially, for example, now granted, we have President Trump as our current president, but whenever we see women that have her personality, specifically like AOC, the squad, right? I think the way in which the media targets them is very interesting, very sexist, very disturbing. And I think we're going to see that happening again. I think it's going to impact our government's ability of who's willing to work with her and who's willing not to. And then also, I think we'll see some careful language in which she'll have to articulate, why deals didn't go through or why things didn't. We'll see a lot of that navigating the broken egg, right? Just because I think they're going to be really careful about how sexism shows up. I think as far as impact for government, I recognize that because she's a Black woman and because she's a woman of Southeast Asian descent, I have been projecting some of my dreams and hopes onto Kamala. And I think a lot of us are, as far as like, well, she'll have a diverse cabinet and she'll, pick people that will be the first, and she'll naturally be an elevator and say, if we're going to cheer you on, I'm going to, she's already named her chief of staff the first queer woman. I have expectations like that for her. And I'm really trying to rein that in and see who she is. Because even though she's had a long history in the public eye, we really haven't gotten to know, like, what are her key values as far as who are the people she keeps close to her. And I'm trying to be careful about projecting my DE&I and racial justice dreams onto Kamala, especially because, and here's like the thing for me, I want to say, because she is a Black woman, I feel more comfortable projecting, of course she's going to do these things. And I had to really have an honest conversation with myself and say, Boni, if she was Elizabeth Warren, would you be expecting Elizabeth Warren to name the first queer, chief of staff? And so I'm having that like itchy conversation with myself, simply because I think the media is going to project a lot of things onto who Kamala is or who she should be. And so I'm really trying to allow space for, okay, she already knows who she is. Let us see what she wants to tell us about herself and what she cares about. Specifically because Joe Biden made a lot of promises about, I'm going to put women in all these places. Kamala really hasn't given us promises. So I'm trying to be, hold space for what she's going to show us. I'm also very cognizant that sexism and racism are going to impact everything for her. Especially if we don't get the Senate. I think we're going to see a lot more nasty rhetoric from the Senate to Kamala.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we kind of saw when Barack Obama became president, there are still a lot of people who say he didn't do enough for the Black community. And I always look at the space around him and who was actually there. to get things done. Nothing happens in a void. And that's really what I'm watching too, is who do you put around you to put things in place? And I'm looking for the first steps of really revitalizing the cultural communities of the United States. That might be a big expectation, some people may think, but I think that there has been so much injustice that it's time. And we have examples from around the world of other countries doing that. I've always been fond of New Zealand because I've watched, I studied abroad there, and I watched it was so different, and that was 10 years ago. And there is a real appreciation of the Maori people and their cultural heritage and how it plays out over government, how it plays out even in public spaces. And I think it's necessary when it comes to really talking about giving people back what they are owed, because they've lost their lives, they've lost their families over it. It's so interesting that we're so comfortable with war overseas, and we don't talk about the wars that have happened since the Civil War on the ground of the USA. And it's a shame. And there's a lot of education that needs to be done on that, because there's literally people that don't know. I was kind of put off by people using Abraham Lincoln. If you really study who he was and the policies that he put in place, you can't hang Indigenous people while freeing Black people.
Yes. Or the fact that freeing Black people was his last resort.
Yeah. And if freeing Black people wasn't about saving Black people, it was about strategy, and it was about money and economics. And but literally within a year and maybe some months, literally he freed Black people, but hung 30, is it 38 plus 2?
I think so. I'd have to, that sounds right.
No. Well, so here's the interesting fact. Where they were hung, that's my hometown. Where these people were killed. And so I speak about Indigenous rights and Indigenous causes so much because it's literally seeped in the blood of the ground I grew up on. It literally is. And I can never forget that. While we are here, we still owe a lot to a people that their descendants survived genocide. Complete. And they're one of the poorest people in our nation, and we don't want to talk about it. So if I'm talking about missing Black girls, I'm talking about missing Indigenous girls too. If I'm talking about poor people within urban settings, within I say Midwestern settings too, because there's a whole nother thing we could discuss on that. I know you're laughing, but I can't speak. I really, really can't speak. And so when you say cautiously optimistic, because you also can identify the privilege that Kamala Harris got as she rose up through the ranks, the fact that her immigrant parents had more rights than Black people who were brought here against their will, and Indigenous people. Both of them came here for school. While I'm excited for that and the possibilities that gives everybody, realize not everybody has that access. And part of me, I wanted to be a Howard grad, but I didn't have the access. And so I chose what I have to get to the next step. And so the stairs are not always the same length in between going up. And we forget that. Sometimes you have a huge stair, and other times, we're taking hops. And we have to be really mindful of that as we start, moving this work forward, because we know it's not done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this is my favorite question of this bunch, actually, because it has to do with your work. How does this all impact the work that you do for racial justice, as being a DEI consultant. What is the lay of the land for you right now?
So I think it's so interesting. I love this question for a number of reasons, especially the timing that you're asking. Because I think we mentioned earlier, right, white consciousness. I think it's so interesting. I think it's also really telling when we see spikes in terms of white organizations looking for DE&I contractors, why they're asking, and really what kind of vision, if any, they have when they are looking at hiring. So I like this question because there's some bold responses coming.
Listen, I can always, if this is a show that's known for bold responses, please, because you're getting people to think. And I love that. So a lot of my coworkers and colleagues who do this work are really into honest truth telling, right? So if you are going to hire us, we want to know exactly what is your vision. If you have a strategic plan for your company, you need to have a strategic anti-racist vision and plan as well. And so I know this kind of aligns with a couple of the other questions that you have, but it all ties together, because as we saw George Floyd to today, there was a lot of spikes in companies asking for, okay, we need to create a whole new program. We're going to come up with a statement. We saw Ben and Jerry really take what they say that they value and putting it all out there and saying, we need to dismantle white supremacy, to, you know, your mom and pop shops who might say, here's a black square. Or even some of our national organizations who are saying, you know, here's a black square and now we want our woke cookies. I think that a lot of companies really weren't strategic about what are they willing to risk, what are they willing to invest, and how long are they willing to do the work. I think whenever I talk to a client and I think about, do I want to actually work for this person, I ask them to tell me the truth. Because if you are saying, I only want to get my woke cookies and that's all I'm committed to investing, that tells me everything I need to know. If you are saying, I want to make this company something that, you know, cultivates an anti-racism, I went blank for a second. But if the company is saying, you know, I want to cultivate spaces in my company that cultivate anti-racist environments, I would like to make a whole department, not just one person, because I'm really against that, especially when it's like, here's a $30,000, become our DEI consultant. I ask them to really be honest with me. And I see a lot of my colleagues asking the same things. Be honest from the beginning about what your expectations are and what you're willing to deliver for your company culture and your clients and your employers and personnel. I think it's really important that we've seen a lot of companies tell us exactly what they're willing to invest. And so when we think about how it impacts my work, I've seen a lot of companies really say, I want to do my, you know, statement that doesn't really have anything. My therapist calls it a nothing burger. I'm going to make my nothing burger statement. And then I'm not going to do any work that's going to change the environment of my company. We see others that are saying, yeah, I'm willing to do a little bit of work. We see other ones saying, oh, Trump's no longer president, so I'm definitely not going to do any more work. I've seen a really big spike in job offers as far as like, come work for us. And then their contract positions, right? So it's like a few weeks. Let's see how it goes. And then we'll reevaluate after like a few months. So I think a lot of times you see talking heads and like more white influencers like Robin DiAngelo, who are saying, you know, I'm getting more picky about who I'm willing to work with. I think we've seen a rise in white influencers and a lot of Black people who have been doing the work for years, who have just been really ignored. And I think that's the story of the way in which white feminism and white allyship has shown up in this work. And I think we have to tell the truth about that, especially because I see white people that I didn't even know should have been my ally or were an ally, all of a sudden being like, oh yeah, I'm writing books, or yeah, I'm getting like all of these gigs. And I'm like, not that it has to be me, but I'm like, I've been doing this work for 7 years and I didn't even know that you cared about Black people. And yet, you know, white people are comfortable going to other white people first before even considering hiring a Black person. So all that to say, it's been a wild ride this past
this past summer, not in ways that I didn't anticipate, but I think what struck me so much was how many white people were willing to straight up lie and steal Black people's work, right? So you have the Cite Black Women's Movement. How many Black professors were not even Black, they were white. And then there was a white male. So there was a lot of like people faking the ability to do this work, and how easy it was for white people to really buy that this was legitimate diversity, equity, inclusion work.
Can I say one thing to that?
Yes,
too?
Please.
Because and I'm going to talk about Black women. For us, and pardon my language, it is so damn obvious. Mm-hmm. For every single one I was pulling up, I was like, so you just didn't ask any questions. When I'm a Black person and I'm in that position, you got 50 million questions from me.
Exactly.
So you didn't ask questions because their proximity to whiteness, or your comfortability with perceiving them as lighter and white. And it just floored me. I was just like, so you just didn't ask any questions, but then to start digging in on Twitter, and that's what I have to say. If you really want to know about this stuff, go dig into Twitter. We'll talk about it some like on like Facebook and Instagram, but if you want to hear the real stories, go to Twitter, because you will find some wild stories from Black and brown people. Is like, listen, I knew so-and-so at this, and this is what happened. Or, and it was so interesting to me. Every story had that lean to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Black people, brown people identifying like, hey, something's not quite up about this.
Yeah.
And then white allyship showed up to defend that person and keep them in position and keep them advancing at that change.
Yes.
And that's what's so problematic, because people assume that Black people don't question other Black people. No, we question you. We want to know, did we lose your sound?
No, you're good. I'm just getting a charger real quick.
Okay, sounds good. Okay.
I didn't want to scream on the camera.
Okay. No, but we knew. And, again, there's that play of white violence that we don't talk about. What actually happens in those situations when you are Black and a whistleblower?
Yes.
Well, essentially, if we look at what's going to happen within our government, within these organizations, you're going to hire Black and brown. What are you going to do? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think kind of transitioning back to like the original question of how it impacts, earlier in the webinar, this lovely conversation that we're having, you mentioned education, and I think that's a big one that we can't miss, as far as one thing that I'm seeing, and really this has been a theme, especially within like white liberal communities, is white liberal communities really like to intellectualize what they are learning about racism, right? So I've noticed, and I run into a lot of people who think, well, if I read one book, I can add anti-racist to my little resume. And I see that again and again. So as far as like white complacency and white fragility and white people thinking that they know all the things about racism, I think I will speak for myself. I think it can be easy to underestimate how easy white people say, okay, I read this one book and now I don't need to do anything else, because I can speak cohesively and intelligently to my white community members about all of the things that I now know about Black people. And I think that is one thing that I saw again and again this summer, as far as how it was impacting my work, right? So at the beginning of the summer, you have tons of book lists and you have tons of book clubs and you have white speakers showing up out of the woodwork, because I'm like, I didn't even know you existed, that are paying, that are really charging like exorbitant amounts to come talk to these white people who don't know what they're talking about. But then you see tons of white people paying these fees and then coming out of it and thinking, okay, I know all of the terms, I'm willing to say I'm an anti-racist now. I'm going to put my Black little square up, and you can come to me for your questions, Brittany. And I think, I think that one of the things when I think about white liberals specifically moving forward is I forget how easy it is for them to say, I read this book, I voted, for the right guy, and now we're done. And I think that impact on my work on a personal level is where I get discouraged. I get discouraged when I hear white people say, well, I have my Black Lives Matter sign in my white suburban neighborhood where Black people would never, ever be able to actually get a house. But I have that. I've done that. Look at my bookshelf. I've decolonized it. There's now Robin DiAngelo on there. I'm not going to talk to my racist uncle because I have this book, but like I hear them articulating in multiple ways. I'm not willing to lose my comfort. I'm not willing to invest or risk anything as long as I can continue to read at my own pleasure and I can learn about racism when it's convenient for me. And so I think that's one thing that's really impacted me is it's discouraged me quite a lot. I'm really discouraged. But I'm also even more proud of my Black and brown organizers who go out and continue doing this work with the knowledge that we aren't doing this to change white liberals' minds. We are doing this because we have to, and we're invested in our own freedom.
That's it. And I mean, to coin hashtags, for me, still 55 is a hashtag I'm going to be using until the next election and after the next election, because that's the reality. That's really the reality. Like 55% of white people is still a lot of, that's a significant amount within, a voting period. And still 55, even for the white liberals too, in the sense of, man, that's a lot of people,
You have a friend behind you.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
He crawled that way. It's just going to be what it is. I mean, I'll edit, whatever.
Yep, I totally, I was just like, just in case you don't know.
But it's really, really important that still 55. Like,
yes,
still 55, and people want to make it really complicated.
Yeah.
No, still 55% of white people showed up to vote for racism, for disenfranchisement, for people dying. And, those are the people we work with. And that's why this line of questioning was so important to me. And having your take on it, because still 55 is your workplace.
Yes.
Still 55 is your grocery store.
Yes.
Still 55 is your city council, your school board, your PTA, all of it. And those impact our communities significantly.
Yes.
And they want to use the narratives that we see them now putting over Kamala Harris. Just work hard enough. Pull up your bootstraps. And I mentioned to my husband the other day of now, those really staunch Trump supporters are like, be kind and gentle now. And
they want a kumbaya.
They want a kumbaya moment. And it's entirely frustrating because you won't be kumbaya when I say, hey, I can't have you vote like this on my school board. I can't have you put this candidate into place.
Yes.
And it talks to that complacency, the violence, the them staking an opportunity too to distance themselves and now ask for the grace that they never want to give people of culture when we come to this table and say this is a problem. That's why we're seeing urban areas turn blue and rural areas still actually go backwards. Many rural areas were turning purple, and we see it's flat out red, except at your urban centers. And like, it's a spread out. So now we have a map of circles. And that's why I like the map of circles that was looking at people versus states, because that's literally what it is when it comes to voting is if the people in your workplace don't get it and they won't pay you enough so you can get further in doing your work, it's creating this cycle of this is what systematic racism is. That thing that you guys are saying isn't real. Let me take you through the timeline, talking points, step by step. Just follow the footsteps. And we're running into this cycle on every single level.
Right.
You know? And so that's why it's so concerning when allyship is really performative, because I need you to show up. If we're going to be talking about what we need, I need you to show up. Sometimes I'm going to need you to show up more than me. Because
that's the goal.
That's the goal.
I mean, in my opinion, that's the goal. White allies. And, you know, I've even been really taking a step back from using the word ally rather than co-conspirator, because I think it really aligns more with what I need and what I'm asking for white people to show up. I want them to anticipate the ways in which racism is going to rear its ugly head. I need them to anticipate how racism is going to show up in other white communities. I need them to anticipate that white people are going to vote for Trump and then not post nasty little TikTok videos of being like, oh, I didn't know that so many white people, like, I need you to be educated. I'll say it like that. I need them.
But it's the truth. I don't know how many conversations that I stopped and said, no, you are not educated about this. You have so if you aren't willing to sit and listen, so you are educated, so when you go out there, you don't make a fool of us, because that's what white people are doing at this point. Is they're making the fool of the hard work that we're doing. If we're trying to change language in legislation, like it's still, what was it, Kentucky? What state was it that they voted? They still kept the language of slavery.
Yes. I saw that.
So white people, white co-conspirator, I need you to do some work. You cannot partake in spaces where I am educating you, because we are supposed to be the educators of how to get this done, because we're talking about our experiences, how it impacts our lives. The people with the most experience are the people that should be doing the teaching and getting paid for it.
Yes. So, say that again.
Because my issue isn't that, oh, this white person is holding this event for white people to learn about racism. You are taking that white person and putting them in every single place.
Yes.
So what, they're educating about something they read?
Yeah.
And that just floors me, because it keeps this belief alive that every opinion matters.
Well, and it keeps the systems alive, right? So when we talk about power and privilege, who is it denying access? It's denying access to all the Black femmes and women and men who have been organizing around this. And we're not getting paid. It's continuing to, really keep us out of areas in which we are saying, this is our expertise. I think it's so interesting, especially when I see like people like Robin DiAngelo or Tim Wise, use your platforms to insist on Black and Brown people being there as well. I'm waiting. I'm thinking, okay, if you are saying I'm an ally and I can write a book extensively about white fragility, then why am I not seeing every time you are giving a seminar, you are sitting there next to Black and Brown women and men who have been doing this work? Why am I not seeing that you're being open and transparent about where your $50,000 commission is going, so that is it going to Black and Brown communities? I don't know. I just think that if you are going to say, I know enough about racism as a white person that I can, give multiple keynote speakers, give multiple keynote speeches, give TED Talks about white fragility, then you should also be transparent enough to say, actually, I'm going to take a step back. because these are the people who have been doing the work, and these are the people who I've learned from, and these are the people that we've consistently forgotten in this movement. I think that what a powerful way to model allyship and co-conspiratorship. I also think when you're talking about education and, you know, our boards are still of people who are voting for Trump, et cetera, I think it goes back earlier when you were saying, okay, where is this money not going to? It's not going to our grassroots movements. It's not going to the people who are actually showing up. And I think that whole system, when we talked about lack of access, why are we not voting and changing systems at the local level? I think we have to be honest about the fact that our education systems are still full of racist people. And that's where we're sending our kids, because frankly, a lot of us don't have the time or the access or the privilege to say, you know, we're going to send them to a charter school, or we're going to do homeschooling. And I think they're all interconnected, and we have to be really real about that.
Most definitely. I had a conversation with my, kids' principal, because we do have the privilege that my kids are learning virtually from home. And we were having some issues. And I just said, I'm not just speaking for me, but there are children of essential workers. There are parents that maybe don't have the education level because they didn't have access in their earlier years, that we're all trying to navigate this experience. And there's very little consideration to that. And it's still very test driven in a moment in time where I don't think it's going to afford us anything. And I ended up asking her, I get that, our state has standards and everything, but when they pull the numbers from those standards and the statistics, what are they going to say? Yeah. We've survived a pandemic. That's what it's going to say. You're not going to be able to take any of the learning outcomes from right now, and other than developing how to operate within a pandemic. Yeah. And I kind of got well, I'm not in charge of that. And I told her, you need to be pushing back. Yes, with the, with the district, with the state, I feel that's your job. And I'm voicing my opinion as a parent at your school that this is concerning. And it's concerning because I understand the privilege that I hold in this situation. I think that's the part with, allies and co-conspirators that always gets lost. And when we talk about acknowledging privilege, like within our cultural communities, and us even having this conversation and being able to talk about Indigenous people, able to look at, this woman that we're like, we finally see, somebody like me, but then look at her background and say, okay, I can see privilege here, here, and here. Because the assumption and narrative that, white spaces want to say is like, well, there is no privilege, or everybody has privilege. But the key is how you use that privilege. And that's what I always keep coming back to, when I have to push back. And within our group, like we literally had to have a whole pause week. And we told the white women in the group, listen, you need to be quiet. We need you for this. And having to have that really direct conversation that it's extremely uncomfortable, but it's also extremely necessary. And it's a part of agency that we think doesn't matter. But it matters so much. Like when you teach agency, it's literally about showing up and voicing your thoughts about a situation you're going through. And that's where we start seeing doors slam. Because you asked for this, I can't do this anymore. And I'm like, well, why are you here? And then they get offended because it's the assumption they should be allowed in all spaces. No, and being intentional, like, no, this is a group for women of culture, first and foremost. There is a hierarchy, because to flip what we've gone through, we have to adhere to that. Because if we don't, the norm will drown us every single time. We aren't the norm yet. We are trying to create something that is a norm, but you have to kind of understand the rules of why and how we have to do this. So
yes,
you know, and that actually leads into my next question. And just to preface this, I might edit it out. I'm so scared this is not recording. So if we have to do it again, it'll be a lovely conversation.
Sounds good. It says recording on my end, so I think we're
good. Good. Yeah. I'm just like, I'm looking at it like, please.
I know.
I know. And that's the value in these conversations. And you do it with the Ebenezer Project too. I'm sitting down and we're talking about, and we're not just talking, we're discussing. It's a back and forth in the exploration of ideas, how to solve a problem. At its core, that's what activism is.
Yes.
Within the space of talking about activism, sometimes we put it on like it's this big white horse. It's on this pedestal. And it shouldn't be, because it doesn't matter if you're having these conversations, if you're working on the ground as a volunteer. There are so many ways to get involved that every little bit counts. And that's, you know, when you don't have the head start, every little bit counts. Also talking about the challenges, which leads into the next question. We have to talk about the challenges. Because within challenges, we find solutions.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and so my next question for you is, what challenges are you facing? I know you've talked a little bit about how whiteness is showing up in spaces and performativeness of, you know, corporate America in designing DEI messages. But what do you feel the challenges are?
So I think one, and I love this question because I think we often don't talk enough about what are the challenges that we're facing. And I think, frankly, for me, it's really reassessing and reevaluating what is working and what has worked and what is no longer working. Particularly because I think when I started this work 7 years ago, the amount of knowledge that white people had looked very, very different than what it looks like that people have today. I think also one of the biggest challenges that I'm really trying to just reassess the way in which I have methods for and reevaluate who I'm taking on in clients is kind of twofold. One, being very choosy about who I choose to align myself with and how much energy I'm willing to invest. That's taking me some time. I'm still not there yet, but that's one thing that I'm really working on. The second thing that I'm really reassessing and reevaluating is, I think, as I move forward, I'm really looking at, are clients telling me the truth, and how much are they willing to invest and reassess their own methods and their own company culture, whether that's someone that's coming to me for a one-on-one consultation, or whether that's a company saying, hey, we need help. I think one thing that I've been really struck with is how many white people will say to me in their roundabout ways is, we're willing to go this far and we're not willing to go any further. And I think that has been really sobering for me as far as what I need white people to risk. I'm really not seeing white people willing to risk. Whether it's those hard conversations in families, people aren't willing to lose relationships. And for me, I'm thinking, you've already lost the relationship. Like, it's not there. So why don't you go ahead and have these hard conversations? Or especially when they're parents of TRAs and they're saying, you know, like, I just really don't want to talk to, and ruffle feathers or have like this conversation with this racist uncle. Well, that racist uncle is already spewing his racist rhetoric to your TRA child. And it's just, I think I'm still learning how to remove myself as far as the traumatic experiences I experienced as a child. It can be easy to feel a little bit of a trigger when I see white people saying, well, you know, I'm willing to do this, but I'm not willing to do this. And the things that I'm not seeing them willing to do are those conversations with close family members, the conversations within their communities, or anything that will be, you know, even slightly thought of as divisive or ruffling feathers. And on the flip, I see that from white liberals. I see white conservatives. I spent this summer actually working with a couple conservative groups, which was really, really encouraging. I didn't anticipate that it would be as encouraging as it was, but here's why it was encouraging. When white conservatives transition to woke conservatives, I see two things happening. Conservatives really believe that anything that they're doing is tied to their spirituality, and their spirituality is tied to other people's souls. So if they're yelling racist epithets as you're going to Planned Parenthood, they believe that it's tied to your soul. And when they flip, they believe that they need to make just as much noise because it's tied to their soul. And I think that's so interesting when I see conservatives flip and say, I did a lot of horrible, horrible things, and now I'm invested in creating new spaces and creating new voices and listening in different ways. I'm seeing them make so much noise and say, you know, I'm already anticipating ways in which whiteness is going to show up because they know what white racism looks like. And when I see white liberals say things, it's like, oh, you know, like I want to be committed, but I'm not going to hire anybody who has remotely ethnic sounding name on my resume, right? So I'm encouraged by people who know and are willing to say, I know what racism looks like, and I'm willing to go out of my way and say, this isn't right, and I'm going to make noise about it. And then my challenges are white liberal people who already have the picket sign, who say Black Lives Matter, who say, no matter where you're from, I'm glad you're my neighbor. And they're really not. And they're really not invested in creating any change that's going to cause them personal discomfort in their regular life. And that's my ongoing challenge.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. You answered a challenge with a success, and I love that because what did I say? Challenges create solutions. But what I wanted to go back to is calls to action and how important they are, because you definitely have spoken about that several times without saying the words call to action. But when we're asking allies and co-conspirators, that's really what we are looking for. We are looking for tangible actions that we can go out and see, not this hidden stuff. I did a post about voting or whatnot, and a white liberal woman got on and said, I couldn't vote for Biden. I love Kamala, but I couldn't vote for him. I was like, so you loved her enough, but you couldn't show up for her. And that therein is the issue, that for centuries, Black and brown people have been showing up to vote for white people. Because wherever we go, whatever legislation is made, we get the trickle down effects. We just do. So when you tell me, and what actually set me off about this is she ended her first comment with, well, I think Biden's going to go in, so I'll probably have good health care. And I'm really trying not to curse right now on video.
Yeah, I was like,
I'm saying, but it was such an example of why voting becomes frustrating for Black and brown communities.
Yes.
Because every single time we are showing up, we're saying, yeah, this is important to me. And because it's important to me, it's important for everyone. And and it's such when you hear the All Lives Matter slogan, and then it's performative. It's still at its core, it's used as a performative piece.
Yes.
Because they're saying all lives matter, but your actions are saying different. So when we are giving calls to action, yes, we are being intentional about how we need you to show up.
Yeah.
Every single time. And you can't say we haven't told you. Because I'm pretty sure this isn't the first time. I don't know this white woman, so I know it's not the first time. We lost your video again.
I'm back. It's my
yay.
It's my phone keeps uncharging. I don't know.
No.
So now I'm holding it.
No, but that's when it comes down to it, that's where we're finding our breakdown when we are looking at allies. When I tell you something and you have to come back and defend why you did it, even though I'm telling you it's still wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where they get stuck in, and they don't like that feeling. But if we're going to do this well,
you have to allow the space for me to check you, because you will be doing something that is wrong. I understand that as you being an ally, co-conspirator. The issue is when it comes to those moments, you don't want me to teach you because you're uncomfortable. So then all of this becomes more about what you want to vision yourself as than actually the liberation and, you know, the advocacy of Black and brown communities.
Well, and I think it also goes back to, right, like you kind of alluded to the fact of the superhero trope that white people like to see themselves. They like to see them as that white savior, right? That narrative. I think it also goes back to really when you dig into assumptions of like, who was truth tellers? Whose voices do we actually care about? And who do we actually want to be accountable to? I think about that a lot as far as when I see white people willing to show up or like wanting to only hear from Robin DiAngelo or Tim Wise. I really push into that. Why? Why do you want to hear from another white person rather than Black and brown people who have been saying, this is what we need? I also really push back as far as like, white people love to get tangible action items, right? So like, make your Facebook thing into a black square. I keep harping on that because that one drives me bonkers. But I think white people really like, sorry, my puppies. I think white people love that action. And I really tell my own story and I say, you know, I've been doing this work for 7 years, but frankly, it's education. I'm learning something new every day. I didn't just grow up woke. I had to really own my problematic things that I've internalized, and I had to put in the work. And when I lead classes, I really think about it in terms of like 100 level. I say, okay, if you would like to get to the 500 level, you need to invest in this like you're going for your college degree. You need to put in the time and to show up and read and listen and not, it's not always for white people to go out and organize and become their own things. Listen to what Black and brown people are asking you to do. And if they're asking you to educate yourself. And whether that means a year, whether that means 10 years, it means continually showing up and allowing yourself to listen to other people and allow room that the opinions that you had and the beliefs that you had are wrong. And that's okay. And it's not enough to like, oh, this shook my core belief and now I'm never going to vote for Biden. It's things like, if you believe with your full self, uncompromisingly, that Black and brown lives matter, it doesn't matter the mode of transmission in which you are getting as far as feedback. It doesn't matter because you have an unshakable belief that all people are I'm losing my words, Brittany. So you're going to have to edit this part. I'm going to say that again. That all people are worthy of life. All people are worthy of breath. All people are worthy of all of the human rights that we say, you know, life, liberty, happiness. If you say that I'm going to show up for you, show up for me. If you want to say, I care about education, care about education. I just think that people forget about that.
They definitely do. Because, I mean, we already spoke about the uneducated opinions, and I've gotten from TRAs because that's, you know, a lot of them are digging in and just getting comfortable with having these conversations with, especially their white parents. And
yes.
And I tell them, you are not responsible for educating your parents.
Yes.
You aren't. I literally have a list of racial justice stuff. If people come to me, listen, there you go and browse. There's so much information. When I get pushbacks on comments and such, my first thing is always to say, so did you Google that?
Yep.
Like, that's my big thing, because for Google, like, there's a lot of stuff that comes up on Google that you can just start exploring on your own. And you have to be committed to gaining knowledge to gain knowledge. You can't wait for people to just tell you like this or that. You literally have to be committed to consuming information.
Yes.
That's what changes opinions. Me standing in front of you, or even another white person, for other white people standing in front of them saying, I'm saying this about, and you should listen. That should not be your only stop. They should have said something that you took notes on, like, man, I got to figure out that word. Oh, that date is important. Like, let me really go see what went on. Because in my education, that's where I've learned the most, when I actively sought out knowledge. Like, being on the, I'm laughing. I know there's stuff in the background.
I
know. Listen, but I know that when I sat down and I was committed to start learning about what actually was transpiring during the boom years of adoption and key adoption, like dates and legislation, it made sense.
Yeah.
It really does. What's going on in our country, what's going on overseas, the different wars, everything lines up. It doesn't matter if we're talking domestically. It doesn't matter if we're talking about internationally. You will find key things that are happening every single time you see a boom of a certain culture of children going into homes somewhere else outside of their community. It's without fail.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how we impact legislation. That's how these things matter. Knowledge matters. But if you're stopping at, I can only listen to other people talk to me about racism, I'm going to have you, whether you are white, black, brown, whoever, I am going to have you adjust your perspective of what it means to do this work. Because I don't know all things. I'm not transgendered. But I had a friend who her child is. I sat and listened. I don't know. She talked. I learned so much just by listening. And even in those moments of listening, I didn't say, well, what about this? Or what about this? I literally would be like, oh, she talked about that? Let me go and look over here. I want to know more about that. And that's really, really important as we do this work, as we talk about burnout, as we talk about being compensated adequately for our experience and expertise, that listen, you hire me for a reason, but you are just as capable of seeking out knowledge. And if you can't do that, bold opinion, but I can't see how effective that you can be, because it's really that commitment to knowledge that makes you committed to change. So, okay. One last thing that we have to talk about, because we talked about burnout and this is our baby. So let's talk about burnout. Let's talk about activism. Let's talk about rest.
I love this.
Let's talk about our campaign. Tell me. Tell everybody about it. You don't have to tell me because we're working on it together. So
the Rest is Resistance is our campaign. I am teaming up with the Daily Adoptee and Disrupt Theater, and we are so excited about this. Really, for those of you who are familiar with Rachel Cargill, it's really just pushing off of her idea for the Rest, the NAP ministry. I really love that idea of honoring and recognizing Black, Indigenous people of color who have really stepped up, and we don't get enough compensation for our emotional labor. We don't get enough recognition for the ways in which we are showing up in our communities. And I love that this partnership really highlights three wildly different, but also all part of that same activism plane of what we are doing and what we're committed to. So Disrupt Theater Company is owned by Starlisha Gingrich. She's a phenomenal woman who is really trying to highlight Black, Indigenous people of color voices in the theater space. And then, of course, the Daily Adoptee, which you're familiar with, and then the Ebenezer Project, which is just really for regular activists, especially in interfaith communities. So what we want to do is we want to get $1,000. We are already more than halfway there. So if you want to send us some of your money and to support this awesome campaign, please do. We'll put it in the Venmo. I think Brittany's going to share that out. But we want to get $1,000 so that we can really support 10 different activists. We want to do 3 in the theater company sphere. We want to do 3 in the TRA sphere, and then 4 just regular activists, and they'll get $100 each. we're hoping to close this by November 22 and then push out the money and by Christmas Day, most likely that week. So Brittany will push out a survey in which people can apply, and then we'll go ahead and pick 10 different activists. And we're really excited about this because we think that honoring the work that we're doing and the ways in which we're showing up and giving people the ability to like, here's money, no strings attached, but if you want to rest, if you want to go on a vacation, if you want to go spa, please do. We want to recognize that this work takes so many of us, and we are constantly learning from so many of you. So this is just a way that we can give back and honor the emotional labor and the physical labor that so many of you are doing.
Awesome. I don't know much more I can say to that. You know, when we talk so much about mental health and the importance of it, that's why I love this project. When you reached out to me, I was like, yes, because it's all part of the conversations that we need to have. So thank you for being on, but I have one last question for you. Any last thoughts that you would like people to hear from you before we close out?
Honestly, my last thoughts are I'm just so grateful for this opportunity. I think, Brittany, I'm going to just say a couple nice things about you for a moment. So don't say anything. I'll let you just blush over there. But for all of those who are listening, I met Brittany, I guess, only at the beginning of the summer, but I already feel like she's one of my sisters. Like I have that much deep respect and love for her. And the way in which she just highlights adoptee voices, especially with this project where she's like, we are experts, not just in adoption, but in so many other things. I think that is fire. And I think so many of you who are already watching this know this about Brittany, but she's a people connector. When she connects, she goes full heart. And I love that. I love that about her. And I think that y'all are just so lucky to have this conversation series. I'm so excited to see who else she's going to feature as she moves forward. And I just am so excited to see how Brittany continues to move and shake and change the world, because I really think that she's already changing the world. And I'm all about like giving people their flowers while it's due. So Brittany, thank you for this opportunity. I am just so excited. I have so much deep love and respect for you. And I'm just really, really looking forward to how you're moving forward.
Thank you for your words.
Of course.
Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the work that we do and kid ourselves about the impact that it's having. And so you've made me cry once today and almost twice again.
Oh, good. So, I think it's so important people know. Like, I think that's one. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on and having this conversation and holding space with me.
I want to give some closing thoughts about tonight's show. Having Boni on was a joy, and her message of cautiously optimistic is really where my heart is at. It's also where my head is at. Still 55 is a real thing when it comes to our rural non-metro areas. In large part, they are red, and that's concerning because that means there's not enough voices that are diverse at the table. For people of culture and for the rest of this nation, our work is not done. On our state and city levels, we really need to impact the voting in a way that gets more people sitting at the table, making decisions about our lives and about the lives of people we love. I really challenge everyone to sit down and look at their intentions as they approach racial and social justice work in the next 4 years. I know my message won't be changing. I'm here to hold you accountable. I'm here to give a voice to the people who are unheard. What are you going to do? Thanks for joining us tonight, and I hope you tune in for our next episode. This is Brittany Nash, your host of the Daily Adoptee News Now.